Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat wrap up of stuff I have read at some point in my past. I've got 3 books I want to talk about this week. Shall we dive into it?
Sophie Vlogs.
The first book I want to talk about is The Remainder by Alia Trabucco Zeran, which is translated by Sophie Hughes. This is by a Chilean author set in Chile. It's looking at these 3 children of Chilean revolutionaries. One of their parents has died, and so they sort of end up going on a road trip. Essentially, the coffin got waylaid on the flight, and they have to go on a road trip to find it. This was an interesting book. I'm going to be honest with you. I struggled a little bit with this book, but I don't think it's a bad book. I think it is a book that is outside of my comfort zone slightly. So there are 2 narrative perspectives in this, and it took me a moment to realise that there were 2 different perspectives, and we were not just the same person being wildly different. One of our perspectives is Akela, and then the other perspective is Felipe. And then Paloma is like the 3rd one of these children, but we never get her perspective, we only see her through the other 2 perspectives. I found Akela's perspective much easier to connect to because Philippe's perspective is stream of consciousness, and I've said before that stream of consciousness is a narrative style that I really struggle with, especially when it comes to not just being able to just like sit down and read the book, but you know, like having to read in like starts and stops. I find it so hard to like break out of stream of consciousness partway through and then come back to it later, because genuinely like most of his chapters are just like one continual sentence. There are no full stops. It is just like commas linking all of his thoughts, which I struggled with, I won't lie to you. So I did find Akela's perspective much easier to like connect to, and also sort of what Akela's perspective was dealing with was easier for me. Akela's perspective is a lot like she has this complicated relationship with this mother who was this revolutionary, but now is very reliant on Akela, and it sort of ties Akela to this place because she has to go around every day, and she has to like go around for dinner, and have you bought me this, and blah blah blah. Like, so there's like these complicated hooks within her, and I just found that a really compelling thing to sort of watch. Whereas Philippe's perspective was very concerned with death, and occasionally got a little bit too dark for me. I'm not great at reading like dark death things. Like there's a whole scene involving a parrot which I kind of had to skim read because it was a bit gross. And another aspect of Philippe's perspective is that he does a lot of counting and tallying, so he has to count and tally the dead and the living and has to try and make them even out. And this got a little repetitive, but I think that was deliberate. So a lot of the things that I struggled with his narrative were things that I think are deliberately done, and I see the purpose of them, but I still struggled with them. So like he goes round and round in circles with this. It gets a little repetitive, and also it gets fragmented, and that's deliberate because it's just his mental state is becoming fragmented. He's sort of like spiraling as this book goes on, and you know when you're like, I see what you're doing, I see that this is deliberate, I am still struggling with it. So again, it's not bad, it's just it was a thing that I struggled with. I think again another reason why I connected to Akela a bit more is that one theme in this that I really loved is looking at the way in sort of like the generational fallout. So because their parents were revolutionaries, they obviously went through a lot, but I don't think their parents realised how much this affected the children. So like each one of these 3 characters carries with them fallout and wounds that are not theirs. It's like the fallout of the wounds on the parents that then affects the children, that sort of thing, you know. And Akela deals with that quite a lot in regards to her mother, which I found really interesting. But then equally, between like Akela and Felipe, there's this stuff which they don't talk about, but then obviously they do talk about at some point, and that sort of thing. Paloma was the character that I potentially got the least sense of, but that's because you're constantly experiencing Paloma through other people's perspectives, because you don't have the narrative from her point of view, so you see these 2 characters' view on her, and occasionally you get like a glimpse of what the true Paloma might be feeling or thinking in a moment. But again, there's always this awareness that like what you're getting is filtered through other people who also don't really understand Paloma, because Paloma's parents moved away from Chile to Germany, and then the whole point is that her mother, who has passed, wants to be buried in Chile again, so she's come back. So again, there is this separation with Paloma, and again, I see it, I recognize it, still did struggle to really get a sense of that character as a result of it, even though I know that, like, that's probably deliberate. So I think where I'm at with this book is, like, I kind of feel like I can see the ways that these things are constructed deliberately, and I think that that's really interesting, and I think there are some really interesting discussions in this book and stuff like that. I can't deny the fact that I kind of struggle to connect to it, and therefore I can't say it's like a new favourite or anything, because I did struggle, but I equally, you know, like, I don't want to punish a book for me not necessarily being the right reader of the book, you know? I don't know, I think it is important to read things that challenge you, and I think that this book did that, and as a result, I'm glad that I read it. I always struggle with stream of consciousness. I think it's just a thing I have to accept about myself. But I did say in my birthday video, which at the time of this posting will be ages ago, at the time of this recording is much more recent. I do want to start reading more translated fiction. This is sort of my first foray into that, and it has certainly been like an interesting and challenging experience. I don't expect all of the translated fiction I read to be quite so challenging narratively, but this particular one was, and I enjoyed it. I just also, like, you know, you're just like, I just think this book is not for me, but I don't think it's bad. That's how I feel about that. The other two books are non-fiction. I'm going to start with a book that I read on my Kindle. That is The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House by Audre Lorde. This is a series of essays, but equally I think they were originally given as speeches and then published as essays. This was my first Audre Lorde, and I now want to read everything she's written, because both because of the things she's saying and also because of the way she's saying them. So from like a narrative style point of view, I could really tell that she's also a poet. Like, there was just like some beautiful expressions. I just wanted to read more of what she was writing because of how she is expressing herself, and I just thought it was beautifully done. When it comes to the actual content of the essays, I found it immensely useful to read. I feel like in many ways it was kind of sad, because a lot of the stuff she's talking about, bearing in mind that this was not published recently, are still very pervasive issues. Like, just one off the top of my head is that in one of the essays she's talking about how, when it comes to discussions of like racism and stuff, it's like her as a black woman has to be put in this position where like white women are expecting her to like cater to their feelings and ease their feelings, and you know, like these things where you sometimes get it when you have just conversations about feminism, and it's like not all men, but it's like not all women coming from like white women, if that makes sense, you know, like there's this navigation of the way that white women can weaponize their femininity and their emotions against, in this case, black women. And that's something that I think you can still really see if you even just like go on Twitter and look at discussions around racism and like these sorts of topics. You can see white women like weaponizing their tears and stuff like this. And like, I'm saying this, I am a white woman, like I'm not trying to separate myself from like who I am versus people, you know. It's just also like, if I can see it and identify it happening, then I can make sure that I don't do those behaviours, you know. This ties into sort of the title of the collection, where it's like, if your oppressors give you tools that are supposed to help you, they in many ways don't actually help you, they just help the oppressor feel good about themselves. So essentially, like, this is another one of those texts where, like, I read this in order to help educate myself and to make sure that I'm, like, continuing my process of attempting to be anti-racist and an ally and that sort of stuff. That's something which I say is, like, a process, because I don't feel like it's for me to sit here and be like, I'm an ally, but it's like, but what am I doing? You know, I need to enact things. It is an action, not like a title. So I sort of really appreciated reading her perspective on like the ways in which we need to recognize the multiplicity involved in feminism. You know, like feminist spaces can frequently also be breeding grounds for racism, homophobia, transphobia, that sort of stuff. People who, so say, want to take down oppression in one form, but then perpetuate oppression in another form. And that's just something that, again, I want to make sure that I am consciously working to, like, unbuild and take down and, you know, all of these things. Like, I just think for such a small collection, there was so much power put into it, and I think she's saying some really, really important things that are still super important now, and I would highly, highly recommend reading it. It was great. finally, I also read this beauty. This is The Phantom Atlas, The Greatest Myths, Lies and Blunders on Maps by Edward Brooke-Hitching. I actually bought this for my partner as a present a couple of years ago now because he really likes maps. He finds maps really interesting. So I was like, hey, here's a whole book about maps. I thought this was going to be more of a narrative. It's almost more like a kind of dictionary of map myths. So the way it's put together is alphabetical, and it's sort of like each entry is like, here is a fictional place that used to be on maps. Here's like the story behind it. Here's like how we realized it wasn't real. And there's lots of map pictures to back it up. I think my favourite part of this is there are like two sections that are not specifically on countries that were made up, but they're on like well, essentially the first one is on sea monsters. So like there's this one map which has loads of different sea monster illustrations on it, and it sort of went through some of the different illustrations and like unpacked like what they were and what people thought they were and like potentially what they could have actually been. So there was like one that's like a sea unicorn and you're like, okay, well that's a narwhal. And then there's others and you're like, I have no idea how you could think this was real, but okay. And then there's another one which was about these this one map that has lots of illustrations of different races that people thought were real. So like there's this one where they just have like one gigantic foot and they like to like lie back and use their foot as like a sunshade. So like there was another one with like it's like people but their feet face backwards. And again, like all of these sort of legendary creatures and stuff. Those were the two sections that I found the most interesting. The rest of this was also interesting. I read this sort of like across a couple of days, potentially a book that would be better to just like dip in and out of because it is just like here's Atlantis, here's another thing, blah. Some of these I found really sad. There was a mix of like genuine like mistakes that then developed into urban myths type thing, and then like people actively setting out to lie and create a falsehood. And oftentimes in those ones there would also be a lot of exploitation. There was a guy whose like whole thing was about trying to get to the North Pole, and along the way he like invented some new places and stuff like that, but equally he really exploited like the people who were helping him. And it was just, there was some real reminders of like the damaging nature of colonialism alongside other ones which were just like more fantastical and that sort of stuff. So it was certainly interesting, and it was interesting kind of to see like the consistency of certain things popping up. Like some things are like there's like a mirage and then you mistake it for a real land and then it just gets put on a map and then it's like hundreds of years people think it's real until someone actually tries to find it and they're like, there is nothing here, So it was really interesting. It's one that I would recommend dipping in and out of more so than just like reading as a narrative. But if you like maps, if you like that sort of thing, very interesting. That's everything I wanted to talk about in this book chat. As per usual, I would love to know, have you read any of these? Do you have any thoughts on them? Do let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you're having the loveliest of days, and I'll see you next time for something different.